A lot to discuss here. Joining me right now is the mayor of Tampa, Florida, Jane Castor, who's also a former police chief. Mayor, thank you very much for sticking around. You were listening to the police chief along with all of us as we were listening to it live. As a mayor, as a former police chief, what's your reaction to what we just heard from Chief Arredondo?
Well, I think the Chief Arredondo he's coming forward, indicating that he's listening to the community and he is willing to reform his police department. Those individuals that were involved in the murder of George Floyd, he's addressing that. He's open to having the community come in and take a look at that police department and look at the policies and procedures, look at the training, look at the ways that they can improve the way that they are policing the city of Minneapolis.
One of the things that he said, the immediate changes that he's making, is he says that he's immediately withdrawing from negotiating with the police union there. How significant is that?
Well, the relationship between the police department and union representation is different in every city. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure where he is at with that. Here in the city of Tampa, we work very closely with our union to ensure that the 1,000-member Tampa Police Department has the best law enforcement officers that we possibly can, and to weed out those few individuals that make their way into the force.
He also, I was fascinated by, you don't often hear a police chief speak in, and you know this as a former chief, in such personal and emotional terms, but this is a very different moment that city is experiencing, and quite frankly, the country is experiencing. You have seen very big protests in Tampa as well. For a chief to really take this on his shoulders, he said very specifically, and it caught my ear when he said, "I must do it," meaning the reforms, I must do it right. What is the impact of that?
Well, I can tell you that the stars that he's wearing right now are incredibly heavy, and I commend him for taking the responsibility and also ensuring that they'll move forward in a very transparent way. And one of the things about law enforcement that a lot of people aren't aware is that law enforcement is judged as a whole nationwide. In other professions, someone can do something inappropriate, doctor kills a patient, and everyone still holds them in high esteem. There isn't a police officer in the nation who hasn't paid for the actions of that officer in Minneapolis. And so that's why it's important that we have federal best practices on a national level, and not just from department to department that they differ. For example, with the carotid restraint, we did away with that in the city of Tampa back in the 90s.
Yeah, and this gets to those actionable measures that he was talking about. I know that you are talking about, and you are also now part of a task force with the U.S. Conference of Mayors for police reform, looking at this. And you're getting at something that I'm very interested in, I think is a conversation that needs to be had, which is where does the change need to come from? We've got more than 18,000 police departments across the country. Is it on the local level, or is it on the federal level, as we're seeing Congress discuss this today?
Yeah, well, I think that the change has to come on the local level. We have to wait to have mayors and police chiefs weigh in before Congress decides the best approach. But one of the things, too, that in the discussion, I'm on that task force, and in the discussion, I said, we have to communicate nationally that we're asking police officers to do too much. Those systemic failures in our nation, in education, in healthcare, in mental health. The police officers are asked to be the teachers, to be the mental health experts, to be the counselors, and it's just too much. We can't, take the funding away from those other areas and then put those tasks on the police department.
And Mayor, I absolutely hear you on that. And I've heard from activists to politicians to police chiefs themselves across the board. That is something that seems to be in agreement, which is police officers, they shouldn't be responding to mental health calls. They shouldn't be social workers. There should be funding in that. But I will say, as I hear that, reforms in place there would not have saved George Floyd or Eric Garner or Michael Brown, because those were not mental health calls. Those were not social worker calls.
Right.
Doesn't this come down to every individual who carries a badge?
Yes, it does. And that goes back to, as the chief alluded to, those programs that the early intervention programs that we have in effect here in the city of Tampa, our quality assurance programs, our officer wellness programs, those types of things. You know, I always tell people that being a police officer, you get to see and do things other people don't get to see and do, but you have to see and do things that nobody should have to see or do. And so we need to pay attention to law enforcement and to the wellness on the level of officers. Also, I want to point something out is that, you know, we have a lot of great recommendations for reforming in law enforcement. 21st Century Task Force on Policing has excellent recommendations, but that's just a portion of the equation. It's in the implementation of those recommendations that we will find success in law enforcement, and that harkens back to having those standards on a national level.
And on who really needs to be taking the lead. Mayor, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Getting your perspective, very unique perspective, is very much appreciated. The Mayor of Tampa, Florida, Jane Castor.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.